you keep your Bibles open to Romans chapter 1, we will continue our series in that particular chapter. I want you to know that about 15 years ago, the Oxford Dictionary people, the publishers, the editors, decided the book is getting a little thick and a little heavy for the little kids who have to carry a copy to school. I don't know they ever carried a copy, but anyway, they wanted it to be smaller. So they went through the book and removed many of the words. Words in a variety of categories, but listen to the words they removed in the world of religion. One was carol, the song that you would sing. They removed the words cracker, holly, ivy, mistletoe, abbey, altar, bishop, chapel, Christian, disciple, monk, nun, pew, saint, and the word sin. They removed sin, and when they were asked afterwards why they did that, their exact quote was, "Well, the word has fallen into disuse and is not recognized by the younger generation." Do you know why dictionaries exist? Because people were going into disuse and not using them, so the dictionary let it be known to people, here's what the words mean. The irony of this is that the words for that era that were not in the book they thought were important, they added those, but deleted these. So they contradicted themselves by adding more words, which were supposedly real words, to be added for that year. It's amazing. They want to get rid of the word sin. And the world has tried for years, if you can just remove God, then we can do whatever we want to. If you can just get rid of the Constitution of the United States, we can do whatever we want to. Just get rid of the rule book, and we can do as we please. Nothing has changed. As Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. Human beings are always trying to get rid of the standards so we can do as we please. But as we continue in our look at Romans chapter 1, we see that God does have his standard, and he does declare sins. But I want us to look at specifically about 6 different theological perspectives. And the first one is that you do what you do because you have free will. You're the one who chooses every choice you make. I'd like for you to look at verse 18 right now, where God says that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who choose to suppress the truth in unrighteousness. I know that the words choose to do not appear, but it's evident they are the ones making the choice. That's why the wrath of God is falling on them, because they have voluntarily chosen. Let's look at some more. Verse 21. They chose not to honor him as God, and they chose not to give thanks. Verse 23, they chose to exchange the glory of God, of the incorruptible God. Verse 25, they chose to exchange the truth of God for a lie, and chose to worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator. Verse 26, the women chose to exchange the natural function for that which is unnatural. The natural way of a woman is to be attracted to a man, but these women were choosing to be drawn to women. And verse 27, in the same way also, the men chose to abandon the natural function of the woman, and instead they chose to burn in their desire towards other men. Verse 32, and although they know the ordinance of God, the standard, that those who practice such things are worthy of death. They not only choose to do the same, but they also choose to give hearty approval to those who practice them. This is a huge point for us always to realize you are responsible for every choice, period. But I was tired, but I was relapsing, but you know, I had a sugar high. Do you know one guy in California actually murdered one of the mayors? And when he went to court, his appeal was he had a problem with sugar. And on that particular day, he was beyond his own self-control because he ate a Twinkie. And the Twinkie gave him such a sugar high, he wasn't responsible for the murder. The judge agreed, and he was set free. God says you are responsible, period. Let's look at 3 other verses, which I've never noticed before this week, which would be even better examples of free will. Look at verse 24. When you choose to do evil, and you do it, God says, therefore God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurity. What's the passage saying? It literally says God gives you free will to drive your life off of a cliff. If that's what you want to do, He gives you free will. Look at verse 26. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions. What He's saying is they have free will. That's what you want to do it. Verse 28, and just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper. They chose to do these. Now, if you go outside of the book of Romans, you can pick up a verse in James, which says, let no man say when he is tempted, it's not my fault. It's God's fault. He tempted me. For God cannot be tempted, neither tempts He any man. But we are all guilty when we choose to follow our lusts. We do them because that's what we want to do. We are responsible for all of our choices. It's not because you're tired. It's not because you're too old. It's not because you had a sugar high. It's not because you're tired that you got up late. You are responsible for everything, period. That really settles a lot. And we need to remind ourselves, you are not a sinner because you sin. The truth is, you sin because you are a sinner. And when you look at it from that perspective, we're no different from everybody else. Let's go on to the second major point of the message. Your choices are based on what you believe is true. If you believe it's true, then you'll do it. And when someone else speaks differently, you may change your mind, but whatever you choose at that moment, you will do according to what you believe. Look at verse 25. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. Where does truth begin? Where's the foundation for truth? The passage says, in God. The truth of God was replaced with a lie. And as long as you can believe the lie, you think you can get away with your sin. The state of California, about 10 years ago, wanted to get rid of one of the laws, so they came up with this argument. Well, no one in our state has ever used this one argument in court that adultery is wrong, so we're just going to remove it. Adultery is no longer a crime in California. So now if you just remove it, you can do whatever you want to. If you believe that lie, that's where you're headed. I want you to notice something else that's impossible for you to read it in English, but in the original language, the verse says, They exchanged the truth of God for the lie. Not just a lie, but the lie. And I guess the translators have always used the word "a" because it causes less confusion. But the lie is God is not all that he claims to be. He's not what life is all about. He's not the provider. He's not the one we need to worship. And if you remove that, then you can replace it with just about anything you want to believe. You remove that. Now, with the context that we've seen in Romans 1 and with the subject matter, I want to make this a very clear point. Do you know that most boys and most men who become homosexuals do that because they have a passion to have a close relationship with their dad? If they don't get it from dad, there's this longing inside of them that says, I need to find it in another man. Do you see how the lie is now leading them in that direction? And as we read this passage, not only the men with men, but the women with women, many women come up with this belief that says, well, I've been hurt by a few men, therefore all men on planet Earth are evil and abusive and bad. And I have a desire to be loved, therefore I will go to a woman. It begins with a lie. Lies affect all of us when we believe them. There was a drug rehab place here in Austintown which advertised, addiction is not a choice. It's a disease. And if you believe that lie that they give, then what's the result? How do you get rid of diseases? You go to the doctor and you take medications. So every time you want to get over your addiction, you just go back to that place and give you more drugs. And who has to pay for this? The government's paying for it to help solve the drug addiction. They pump more money into these rehab places to pump more chemicals into you. It's not doing any good, but if you believe that lie, that it's not a choice, then you will keep doing it. One guy who robbed the bank that we go to right up the road here, if I had seen him, I probably would have just tackled him and known that he doesn't know what he's doing. He keeps robbing banks when he's drunk. And the last time they said the reason he's doing this is because he has a mental problem. So they're going to remove most of his time in jail, in prison, because it's not his fault. If you believe these lies, you can do whatever you want to do in life. You were just born that way, so they say. Well, they have a chemical imbalance. No, it isn't. But if they do have a chemical imbalance, it's probably because they've already defied God's laws and they fill themselves with such anger and bitterness that they then have a chemical imbalance, and they try to solve their guilt and their bitterness with other chemicals. But let's not look at these other extremes that are out there in the world. Why don't we look at the lies that we have believed in our own lives? How about the lie that says, oh, come on, just go ahead and let me see that television show. I've been married for so many years, there's nothing you could do to shock me. Well, why do you want to watch it? Another one. Well, I've never been married, and God would not deprive me of fun. Another lie. But once you believe it, you go do whatever you believe is true. Another one is, but I can't get a job because I'm on welfare. You don't understand. As soon as I get a job, they will cut it off, and all of my health benefits will end. What's the lie? My God is not big enough to take care of my needs. Isn't that the truth? So I hang on to the true God called government. Yes, keep giving me my free money because I'm afraid to trust in God. Another one, yeah, but you don't understand. The government legally recognizes us as being single, and I continue to get all this extra money. If we go ahead and get married while we're living together, we won't get the additional money. The same belief. My God is not big enough to meet my needs if I obey Him. Isn't that what people are saying? But if they can change in their mind that God's not going to meet my needs and come up with another twisted lie, they'll go ahead and live a life of sin. But I don't want to wait to purchase that large item because I might not ever be able to get it. So that's why I borrowed the money. Even though God states twice in the Bible, if you will only follow my ways, you'll never have to borrow money for anything. Wouldn't you rather enjoy the pleasure of praying and God providing for exactly what you need? But God will not provide. We see how we've exchanged the truth of God that He provides for us into all these little applications of our lives. Another one is maybe we hear problems going on in one of the local schools. What we need to do is call up a TV reporter and get them to stir up the anger in the people. Why? Because God's not big enough to solve it on His own. So let's get angry people to get behind us and support this issue. And then people get married and have only 2 kids. Why only 2 kids? Well, things are so expensive these days. You can't afford to have more than 2 kids and a boat and a swimming pool and a yacht and a country club membership. You can't have all these things if you have more than 2 kids. My Heavenly Father said, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth." He also says, "I will meet all your needs." He always says, "You obey me first, and then I will provide." I received a phone call just a few months after I came here to Ohio, and a guy from the previous place I lived said, "Randy just wanted to tell you thanks." I'm thinking, it's already been a few months. I've already forgotten most of any conversations. I mean, what's he talking about? He said, "You've always said God would provide. And you know that my wife and I are really struggling. We've had our 4th child. And we know the Bible says that women are supposed to stay at home. Mothers are to stay at home. We know that in our hearts. But things are really getting tight. And I'm already looking at options. Maybe I should start a new business. But every time I try, I get nowhere. But you know how talented my wife is, and she could get all this work." Well, we finally put our foot down and said, we're going to trust God. And he said to me, "Randy, the most amazing thing happened. I went to work. The owner of the company invited me into his office. I had no idea what was about to take place. The owner said he appreciated my work so much that he gave me not just a raise, but he doubled my pay." And he's thinking it only took place because he committed himself to trust in the Lord. What a testimony. It's easy for us to look at the rest of the world and say, "Oh, those sinners don't understand." But the truth is, we're all in the same boat. We've all believed lies. Which leads us to the next area. God's standard for your life is a blank that will be blank for a few more minutes because I want you to look at a diagram first. If you notice underneath that there are lines, graphs, bars, however you word those, Each bar represents a continuum, a complete list of every single possible choice any human being could make. And all those to the far right are those which everybody agrees are wholesome and good and true good deeds. And all those to the right in the dark section, those contain all those really bad things that everybody, virtually everybody, will admit those are evil, bad things that we should never, ever do. And you ask the person, the average Christian asks the question, where do you draw the line? And in the middle of that continuum, notice there's a lot of gray area. And many Christians will place their line in different locations. No, here's the true standard. I grew up as a teenager in the 1970s, so what they believed is the true standard. And then you find the kids in the next generation said, no, it's really over here. You're being fanatical and being too straight-laced. You're too old-fashioned. This is the new standard. And then that generation grows up and it changes. Where do we draw the line? So many people argue, should we dance, should we not dance? Should we cuss or use slang words or neither or? Where do you draw the line? And the bottom line is this. Your purpose in life is to be perfect. You don't draw the line in the middle, in the gray area. You draw the line to the extreme far right. Do you see? The third line represents God's ideal. So the blank is filled in with the word perfection. God's standard for your life is absolute, total perfection. You say, well, where is that in the Bible? Oh, a bunch of places. How about Romans 3:23? For all have sinned and fallen short of God's perfection. That's the standard. But right now, some of you are struggling. But we'll never be there. This is where we should be. And other people are saying, no, it should be here. And others say, no, it should be here. And God is saying, no. Your purpose in life is absolute, total perfection. And if we can't accept that, we throw away the whole Bible. We throw everything about God in the trash. It makes no sense at the point we say, I get to choose what is moral and what is right. The other tension with this, if that's the standard, all of us are way over here. I am too. And there's this tension here. Now, wait a minute. That means we've all sinned. Hello, we all have. And when we start saying those people over there are worse sinners than we are, that everyone who is above me is a good person and everyone below me is bad, that's the way the devil wants us to think. But God's standard is absolute 100% total perfection. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether you're tired, whether you're hungry, it doesn't matter. He expects us to be perfect. So does everybody else. You expect everybody else to be perfect. By the way, that's not the only passage. We've looked at Romans 3:23. We've all sinned and fallen short of God's absolute perfection. When you go to Romans 8:28-29, we come to the familiar passage. God causes all things to work together for good, to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. Why? That we might be conformed to the image of his Son. His image is not in the middle of the gray area. It's way to the extreme. Our purpose in life is to be absolutely, totally perfect. That we trust God for everything that he wants us to trust him in. I hope there's tension in all of your hearts because that's true. We are all sinners. None of us is perfect. We have all blown it. We all deserve God's wrath. Which leads us to the next point of the message. The holiness of God should lead us to fear. Chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against 10% of the ungodliness? 20% of the ungodliness? No, it says all ungodliness. That means all the ungodliness in our life. And unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Now go to chapter 3, verse 18. We'll talk about this more next week. But in this passage, God talks about no one loves God. There's none righteous, no, not one. They're altogether forsaking God. There's none who seeks after God. And then you go down to verse 18 and it says, there is no fear of God before their eyes. They involve themselves in immorality, with anger, with bitterness, with violence, because there's no fear of God. When there's no God, because you've believed in evolution, because you believe we can change the Constitution, whatever the lie is, if you remove God, then you remove all of His holiness, and therefore we're no longer sinful anymore. But when you put God back on the throne as the holy, perfect, pure God, there is a fear of His discipline for us. The wrath here is not the wrath that comes for non-Christians after they die. This is the wrath of God allowing you to do what you want to do. If you want to drive off a cliff, God's wrath will give you free will and let you get the consequences of your choices. A few weeks ago, a bunch of pastors and us, we gather about once a month just for encouragement, fellowship. And some out of this subject matter came up. And it grew to an immense stirring, partially because of the upcoming Franklin Graham event coming to town. And the conclusion from everybody was how this perception of God has changed from a fear of God to just a respect of Him. No, all of us, there really should be a fear. And some people go to the utter extreme and say, well, it's not supposed to be like a child cowering in the corner of his room as his abusive dad walks in. Agreed, that's not the point. But it's amazing how senior adults have the best description for the fear of God. Even though they may say verbally we shouldn't fear God, they later say, ha, ha, ha. When I was a kid and I got into trouble, my parents would take a switch off of one of these trees and whack at me. I'll never do that again. Now, what did they just say? They said they feared their parents more than they fear God. We are supposed to fear God in such a way that we don't do sins because we know His wrath will come. There is no fear of God. Sadly, in most Christians' homes, the stuff that appears on the TV, the stuff that appears in magazines, the stuff that people talk about on the phone, the things people involve themselves in, there's no fear of God. It's the new standard that we live by. God's standard is absolute 100% purity. And God's wrath being outpoured in here is the equivalent of you driving your car full speed ahead towards the cliff, and for a while He's holding onto the bumper saying, please, don't go, don't go. But at the moment His wrath is poured out on you, all He does is let go of the bumper and watch you go over the edge. And when you crash at the bottom of the cliff and your car is totaled, Satan says, God is such a mean God for crashing your car. You're supposed to be able to go off of the cliff and have fun, but not to have your car to be crashed. That's what Satan says. You were just having fun with your alcohol. You didn't mean to blow your brains out. It's all God's fault that you blew your brains out. No, it isn't. God gave us what we wanted. Psalm 106, He gave them their request and sent leanness to their souls. The more you give in to your desires, the more you let go of a passion for God to the point you don't even care about God anymore. Let's go to the next major area, a theological point for our study in Romans, and that is, you cannot remain in your level of sin. We're not going to read the passage again, but when you read from verse 21 to verse 31, you see how the people keep getting worse and worse and worse. I didn't live back in the 1920s, but I'm told that way back in those days, a woman was risque if she pulled up her skirt and exposed her ankles. Years later, if she showed off the calf, and later her knees. Why? Sin never stands still. It keeps moving. And anyone who settles down and says, this is the true standard of sin and righteousness, if they're not moving towards God, they are moving further away from God. The standards change. Sin never stands still. And even worse, this is the worst part, when other people are involved, they start pulling you in harder. You join a gang for just a month. No. Once you're in, you're never getting out. They start tormenting your life if you try to get out. You join the mafia. You try to get out, they will come after you to destroy your life. And if you're a homosexual, they will not let go of you. They say you need to participate in these activities and protest against that. And if you don't do it, the pressure builds. And it builds. And many of the angry ones will push so far, it's worse than control. You stay in this and fight for what we want, or we will kill you. There's no way you can get involved in any sin at all and not have to go through consequences. And it never ends. The tug, the pull to be evil always exists. Let's go to the last point of the message, which is the patience of God gives us time to repent. You know, if God were to give us all what we truly deserved, we would all go to hell right now. The question is not why does a loving God allow all these bad things to take place? The real question is, why does a holy God not kill us right now? When we look at our society and see how far it's gone, and God is saying, because I love you, and I'm giving you one more chance to get your life right with God. Will you do that right now? As we look at the verses again in verses 24, 26, and 28, in every case, God said He gave them up to something else. He never said in those passages, once you commit a sin, I kill you. He doesn't say that. He gives us another chance to give our lives totally to Him. Can I challenge each of you right now? We're going to take a moment now to pray and to get our own hearts right with God. Have any of you reached this extreme level of perfection that God desires? We all know the answer to that. It's no. All of us fall far short. Are you willing to admit the things that you do wrong that are keeping you from being at that level of perfection? I know, truth be told, there would be millions for all of us. Would you admit things that you already know of, keeping you from drawing closer to God? Would you bow your heads for prayer?